Cam Rising or Isaac Wilson? Who will be Utah's starting quarterback for their matchup against Utah State? That's what we're going to be discussing on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with everyone in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can find our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Ultimate College Football Head Coach. It's a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can begin your coaching legacy today. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by ESPN 700's Porter Larsen. And Porter, Cam Rising or Isaac Wilson is what all the rage is going to be. Who is going to be the quarterback this Saturday? And you had the report that the x-rays came back negative on Cam Rising, but I think there are a lot of people still sitting here and wondering, and in large part because Kyle Whittingham played it coy as well about who his quarterback is going to be. If the injury was to his right hand, his throwing hand, who the actual quarterback is going to be. I just feel like Utah has continually been cautious with Cam Rising, with what a massive game the Oklahoma State game is, even if he is obviously seems pretty good based on the indication of like, hey, he was on the sideline. He was in a good mood. It wasn't like he was sitting out there on the sideline, like pouting or anything like that. It seems like he should be back fairly quickly. Obviously, we're all scarred by last year's situation, but I think that Utah wants to take a cautious approach, and I expect to see Isaac Wilson against Utah State because, as we'll talk about a little bit here too, I just think this is a matchup that really goes in Utah's favor no matter who is under center.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Kyle plays it a little coy, and some of that is intentional, right? You play it to your advantage when you can, and Kyle's a guy who he does not give a lick what anybody in the media tweets about it, what fans think about it. If you want to see your favorite player on Saturday and you're not sure, Kyle doesn't care. He does not care. In fact, you go back to last year, this was obviously a different conversation. Cam's injury was severe. It was something where we weren't sure what he would look like when he came back. This is a different story. But last year, there was a time where in that building, they knew Cam Rising was not playing.
Yeah.
Outside of that building, we were all flustered about it. And guess who was coming to town? UCLA. And Kyle knew that Cam wasn't dressing long before Saturday. Cam ended up dressing for the game, even though we knew he wasn't playing. In the building, they knew he wasn't playing. And that threw UCLA for a little bit of a loop. And JT, I was on the field that day pregame. And I saw the second that Cam Rising ran out on the tunnel, literally the second he ran out of the tunnel, I looked over to UCLA's sideline, and their coaches had a little conference, and they changed up what they were doing. They started to run some different formations. Cam even took some reps with the offense, knowing that he was not taking a snap that Saturday. And UCLA was flustered that first part of the game, and their defense really struggled with some of the different looks that Utah threw at them that Utah was, not going to had Cam Rising been in the game. They're going to use that to their advantage. Kyle's going to use it to his advantage when he can and as much as he can. But I want to be clear, if this were a Big 12 title game, if this were, frankly, even just a conference game that had stakes on the line, right? And this, no disrespect to Utah State, this is an exhibition game. When we're talking about the Big 12, we're talking about the expanded college football playoff. This is something that Utah, get up there, get out of there healthy, and hopefully get out of there with a W. But you're not going to sacrifice a lot of long-term things for a game up in Logan.
No, you're not.
That being said, if it were, like I said, a Big 12 game, if it were a late vital game that Utah needed, Cam would be under center. He would be playing. Do they play it safe? Do they play it cautious? I could very well see them doing so, but I can't tell you one way or the other as of today.
That is fascinating, though. If this was, you mentioned the pivotal game, that is obviously the one that's Oklahoma State. You do think that Cam would play?
I do. I think, we saw him last week with the bandage on his fingers.
Yeah.
There was no splint. There was no break, as I mentioned. Reported there were X-rays done. There was tests done, and there's no structural damage. Cam's dealing with a cut at this point. Now it jammed up his fingers a little bit. That's why they're taped together. But what he's mostly dealing with is a cut to one of his middle fingers, and that's something that you could even play with if you needed to, even if it were something you wrapped up pretty good. Now it's on his throwing hand. That's where the conversation changes. Is Cam at his full strength? Can he get enough zip on the ball? Is it affecting him at all in that way? And do you have to put anything on there to protect it? Because if you do, that could change the way Cam grips the ball, and then maybe it's a different conversation. But yeah, I think he'd be out on the field and playing. Although I think there's a good potential he does dress this Saturday, whether we see him or not.
Well, for nothing else, exactly what you just talked about. That was a fascinating story about what a ruckus it caused on the Bruins sideline when they saw Cam out there. That is such a crazy thing. And the Utah offense, I was at that game as well, Porter, needed all the help it could get that day in that 14-7 slugfest. Everyone likes to dump on the Chip Kelly Bruins and all that. That defense was really good last season.
Well,
and Utah,
And JT, a lot of people get frustrated with how Kyle approaches injuries, right? Mm-hmm. And I get that as a guy who, cheers for the Cowboys and gets an injury report. And that's a part of following a team. Until the Big 12 or until college football makes you shouldn't. And Kyle should use that to his advantage. As you mentioned, they needed that against UCLA. They won by a touchdown in a game where those little strings that you can pull, they actually do matter in a lot of circumstances. So for fans that are frustrated and are, rolling their eyes at how Kyle sometimes uses injuries as an excuse to murky the waters, just know there's intention behind it, and it's not misguided. Kyle kind of knows what he's doing.
Yeah, it's proven to work. Like you mentioned, the confusion it creates, and it is genuinely, you only have so many hours a week with your team to prepare for your opponent. So Utah State this week is preparing for Isaac Wilson and Cam Rising, and things will be, I know that Kyle said the game plan won't be crazy different, but when all Utah does, as I mentioned this on my show yesterday too, when all Utah does is talk about how, well, Isaac Wilson, when he's in, we don't open the playbook up as much. That obviously means it is going to be drastically different when he's in the game. But one thing that Utah is going for them is the opponent, no matter who is out there at quarterback. This is a Utah State defense that through 2 games, one of them being against Robert Morrison, the other against USC. Obviously, USC is USC. They've given up over 900 yards through those 2 games. And even like Robert Morrison, 362 yards, 137 on the ground, 225 passing yards. They trailed Robert Morrison at the break. Like, this is a Utah State team that is, we don't know how in the escape of the Mountain West. We'll see how they factor in there. They have some pieces, but there's also other parts where it's like, okay, how's this going to come together? Just to put it plain and simple, this team is not on Utah's level. And that's why, like I kind of said off the start, I mean, it could be Brandon Rose and Sam Huard for all I think it matters. I think no matter who's under center for Utah, I expect a big win for Utah in this one, because I just think they're clearly the better team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Utah State's in a different spot right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That what they're dealing with is on the football field one thing, off the football field another. Yeah. And you mentioned it, their talent level, some of their ones are awesome. Ike Larsen's one of the best defensive backs in the country, right?
Good receivers.
Their wide receiver room is always spectacular. It's production wise really a really good room. And hey, we know that Bryson Barnes can hurt you in certain ways on the ground. Mm-hmm. He's not going to make too many mistakes. He's not necessarily going to go out and throw for 400 yards and beat you on his own in some sort of air raid. But he poses some things, and hell, he knows Utah's defense as well as a lot of folks, including other coordinators, including other opposing quarterbacks. So that's another thing where Bryson's worked against this defense in scout team for years. He's going to be comfortable going against these guys, and that's not something that a lot of lower level quarterbacks are oftentimes have that perspective, have that privilege. So that's another little wrinkle that you can throw in there, depending on who we see at quarterback at times for Utah State. But yeah, this is a game that they should get out with the W. And again, as we're approaching Big 12 play, the number one goal against Utah State for me is to stay healthy. Number two, I got to see a few things on the offensive line. And then obviously the quarterback situation. If Cam plays, if he doesn't, who's QB2? If Isaac starts, who's his QB2? All things that we'll be paying close attention to.
Absolutely. I love that you brought up the offensive line because I feel like they have had some up and down moments and potential growth too, but just throughout the game hasn't been the most consistent unit yet. Great opportunity to get consistent against Utah State. You mentioned Bryson Barnes' comfort level. It's absolutely true, right? Spent so much time playing against this Utah defense, but I do not think he will be operating with a comfortable pocket because, man, is this Utah defense and even particularly that Utah defensive line playing on a whole nother level right now. I want to talk about the incredible start this Utah defense is off to in one moment. But first, I want to take an opportunity to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of our episode of Locked On Utes, our friends at Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Hey, Locked On Utes fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do, Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step inside the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of the Utah Utes? From recruiting players and hiring coaching staffs to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about the game. You are responsible for calling offensive plays too. So your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football Head Coach is completely free, has no ads, and was 100% playable offline. You play on the go as you want and when you want to. You can also use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, no spaces, LOCKEDONCFB, to go inside the game store and get a boost to start building your program. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com, ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up in the App Store. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Begin your coaching legacy today. I also want to talk with you all about our great friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Game Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I love so many of the features about Game Time, whether it's their low price guarantee where you will get credit for 110% of the difference, the panoramic view from your seat. So often we go to games and we're like, oh, these seats look like a decent view, but we don't know what it's actually going to look like. That's not the hassle with Game Time. Plus, Game Time, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying Game Time with tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That is capital L for lock, O for on, and C for college for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Porter Larsen back in here with me. And Porter, this Utah defense has just been spectacular. And I think it does start with the pass rush up front. But before I even mention them, the fact that they're 7th in the country, and they're not 7th in the country because they played 2 cupcakes, right? Like, yes, they beat Southern Utah. But shout out Southern Utah, massive win at UTEP over the weekend. Love seeing that. But then, I mean, just dismantled Baylor, especially when Cam was healthy and everything was rolling. I mean, it was negative yardage for the Bears for most of the first quarter. Like, this Utah defense is just on a whole nother planet right now with the ability. I think they're the best unit overall in the Big 12. I think they're one of the best defenses in the country. And we can maybe break down the individual aspects in a moment. I teased the defensive line a little bit already, but it really does take all 3 levels working together to be playing at such a high level. And Utah's lucky to have that.
Yeah. And I love that you shout out SUU, my guy, Delane Fitzgerald. His family's a Hokie family. So that's a good buddy of mine. So shout out to Delane and SUU. They, of course, I also love how he approaches the Utah game without like the BS you get usually approaching those games. He just kind of tells you what it is and what they're there for, right? Yeah, man, Utah's defense is as expected, and in the pass rush maybe better than expected right now. Ben Fillinger, Connor O'Toole. It's not like we didn't know they had the bodies, but guys coming off injury, guys switch positions, right? There was just some questions on just how dominant they would be. And right now, leading the Big 12 in sacks, Van and Connor number 1 and 2 in the Big 12, the top 10 in the country in sacks, the top 10 in the country in pressures. They're doing the chaos thing, right? That you really, really want to see from a Utah defense. That makes things easier on the back end for the ball hawks like Teo Johnson and hopefully get those guys involved as the season goes along, forcing some turnovers and whatnot on that end. But yeah, man, you have to like the push you're seeing up front, and you're seeing it with, it's gone unnoticed because they've been pretty damn good. Samote Pepa, David Fotu, Junior Tafuna, Aliki Vamahi, all of these guys have missed time during the first couple of games, and they're still really getting a good push up front, and especially from those ends.
Yeah, they've been fantastic. The fact that Tanu Vaso was so dominant in the first game, doesn't play in the second game, and Samote Pepa is also so dang dominant in the second game. It's like you don't even give it a second thought that Utah's missing those guys. Junior's Junior. But then looking at even the defensive ends, what you said is absolutely true. We like the pieces that Utah had. We knew that Utah would still have a really good pass rush, but the fact that like Jonah Ellis was one of the best pass rushers in college football last year. Like when you look at the best pass rushers in college football from a year ago, like look at UCLA's defensive line. Like they desperately miss Leo Latu. Utah does not at this moment, like sure, they missed Jonah Ellis because Jonah Ellis, but like they haven't missed him because the production has been basically identical. Look at how fast Connor O'Toole, he got the Baylor left tackle bench during the game because he kept running around him constantly. We know how quick Logan Fano is. Van Fillinger finally healthy. I didn't really realize how banged up he was last year, but when you looked at his stats, you were like, there is a drop off here, and I wonder why that is. And you see, and man, he physically as well too. Like when you just look at these defensive ends, defensive tackles, it's just a room of just like the most intimidating guys you're going to find out of football field. Speaking of intimidating, I mean, Lander Barton flying around with the way he is. Karene Reed did get hurt a little bit last game. We haven't heard anything there, but as Witt says, he reports on season-ending injury. So I expect to see Karene Reed back on the field here soon for Utah. I think Sione Fotu is still growing as like he's not as good as Leavani Damuni would have been, but still a really solid linebacker 3. And there's so many defensive backs that are stepping up for this team. But Porter, we had talked a long time ago about wait till Nate Ritchie gets back up to speed. Man, he looked back up to speed against Baylor. He was flying in there, making plays behind the line of scrimmage like the Nate Ritchie of old.
He was. Now, there's a little bit of Nate Ritchie that echoes. I won't single any safeties out, but guys at Utah that play up in the backfield, they play fast. They're really good at disrupting. Sometimes over pursue a little bit. There's a few times where Nate got caught there, and those are the only things that I really have any complaints around there. But yeah, man, he was up in the backfield, really really good, sniffing out some of the outside run plays, and Nate's been solid. But yeah, like I said, sometimes he plays at such a frenetic feel that you hope to calm it down a little bit, because those are some of the situations where you let guys get behind you or you over pursue a little bit and then the play's gone the other way. Those are the only things I've really noticed with Nate, but he had 9 tackles, one of them in the backfield. He was all over the field, and I think you'll continue to see that this year.
You will. And this Utah defense, I expect to have a spectacular season. I talked just on yesterday's show, Porter, about why, yes, like Utah is going, if Cam Rising were to miss extended time, like you mentioned, we don't expect that to be the case, but like Utah would not be the favorite to win the Big 12 without Cam Rising, but you can't convince me they wouldn't still belong in the top 5 because of the roster they had. And then everyone acts like it's all doom and gloom with Utah, when last year their 4 losses came to top 20 teams. They're only going to play one top 20 team, I believe. I'm very curious to see where that Arizona team is going to end up. Shout out Big Sky, like Northern Arizona, what they almost did. But I just think it's McMillan and Fafita can only do so much for some of the deficiencies that team has overall. Like, I do think this defense is, and I'm curious, do you agree that number one, they're the best overall unit on both sides of the ball in the Big 12, the Utah defense, and that Utah can ride this defense to potentially a historic season, and we'll see what the offense gives them still?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's the most composed unit, right? The Utah defense, and with Cam healthy, the offense as well. Without Cam, and we talk about this, it was the conversation of the year last year. Without Cam, there's clearly a difference, right? And it's not Isaac's ability to throw the football It's the offense. It's recognizing the wrinkles in Andy's offense and adjusting to those based on the defense that you're playing. And frankly, Isaac is, number one, thrown into his first game in Southern Utah. You like to kind of wipe that one off the slate if it's an 18-year-old kid in his first game. But then you get thrown into it in a situation where you're needed against a Big 12 opponent, and you're not just against any Big 12 opponent. I'm not saying Baylor's a great defense, but what they do defensively and what Dave Aranda is known for defensively is essentially confusing you before the snap, right? He will throw a bunch of different looks at the line of scrimmage that don't play out over the course of the play, right? And those are things that Isaac was having a kind of a slower time recognizing during the course of the play. And by then, at this level, JT, everything happens so fast that the play's over with, right? But when your reads are late, the play's done. And on Saturday, Isaac was a little bit late on some of those reads and some of that recognition. And I think that's the bigger issue. When you see him sling it, when you see him confidently step into a throw, you're like, oh, that's what Kyle sees. That's what Andy is looking at, right? And that's what should bring you optimism if you're a Utah fan. But you absolutely do have to see those steps in recognition. It can be pre-snap. It can be slowing things down before you take the snap and really trying to recognize what's going on. Maybe sending an extra guy in motion to create a tell for the defense. Maybe you can see what coverage they're in based on the motion you throw out there, right? There's things you can do to help Isaac kind of assess the defense pre-snap so that things aren't happening so quickly at the snap, because I think that is, if you ask me on tape what is bothering him the most, it's that. And it was the coverages, frankly, from Dave Aranda that pre-snap looked like one thing, and then during the play were a different thing that were bothering him on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. We spent some time talking about Isaac's struggles yesterday, and he has things he needs to improve on. But this offense as a whole, the offensive line is something that we haven't really touched on either yet. And, some of the running backs and the things there too. And I thought Mekhi was fantastic, obviously, but there have been other situations where, you see a guy miss a hole, and just still things that are coming together with this new Utah team. And some people, because things haven't come together, have wanted to see Sam Huard and Brandon Rose. Well, if Isaac gets to start on Saturday, Utah gets up big, we might finally get to see him. And why haven't they gotten more of a shake in this quarterback race? That's what we are going to be diving into in one moment. But first, I want to talk with you all about our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. You can just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook, and we have so many great sports going on right now. Obviously, football being the primary one, but MLB playoffs right around the corner. And with the NFL, how about some of the pro Utes are balling out, right? Jalen Johnson, we saw him making some plays this weekend. Still waiting to see Dalton Kincaid come along a little bit with the Bills, but they were able to get a win. There are so many Utah players throughout the NFL. And whoever your NFL team is, you can support and head over to FanDuel to check out their odds for the weekend or stay in the college football world. We got tons of great games coming up this weekend. Make sure you guys head over to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook today. All right, Porter Larsen with me to close out this episode. Porter, real quick on the offensive line. I've talked openly like, hey, you look at Isaac's first drive, that might have been a completion if Tano Tonga doesn't get driven back and the pass is batted because Micah Pittman's open on the slant. We've seen holding calls. That's why his very first play when he threw was 2nd and 20 after Cam got hurt, because I think it was Jaron Kump hit with a holding call. There was a key 3rd down run where Mokafisi got blown up. We saw one time where Spencer Fano couldn't set the edge. So this offensive line is still a work in progress. Pieces are still coming together, but the last drive when the Utah ran the ball with so much success was incredibly promising. What are you looking to see out of the Utah offensive line, and what do you feel is holding them back still?
Yeah, well, obviously, what's holding them back is that it's still a unit that's working together and finding a way to do that, right? It's a 5-man group that has only had 2 football games together. A couple of them do have a lot of starts, mainly on the interior, right? But on those edges, man, you've got a freshman, redshirt, and a true sophomore, guys that are really still figuring out that position and the level that it takes to play in the Big 12 and the Pac-12, and they don't have the reps yet to be, what you expect a Utah team to be week 5, week 6, as the train really starts to roll. But time is ticking, right? Oklahoma State's just a couple weeks away. You got to go up to Logan this weekend, and as Kyle said in the post game, I kind of had a back and forth with him on the offensive line, and he said it was hot and cold, right? That there's moments where you really do see the potential, why they have a freshman, true sophomore, a junior out there, why there's no seniors on that offensive line is because of the potential. And you see that every once in a while, but there's also those cold moments where missed assignment or miscommunication pre-snap, right? And they miss maybe a blitz stunt, right? Or a spin where you're supposed to take him on the inside if he spins that way, and there's a miscommunication there. We see that, right? Those are things that are correctable. They're things that Jim Harding is kind of received the benefit of the doubt in figuring out over the course of a season. But yeah, it's been hot and cold, and what we need to see from this offensive line is a little bit more push in the run game, right? You can tell, and it's not that they're not up to speed with their bodies, they're not ready for it, but you can tell this isn't an offensive line that is worked together, taking those steps to really be a 5-man cohesive unit when you're pulling, right? The timing of that is so specific and so essential to the play that you're seeing a little. It's not rust. It's the opposite of that. They're working through some kinks and really trying to learn the specifics in game speed. Have they taken those reps? Have they done a bunch of it in spring and fall? Of course. But once you get out into the stadium and there's 50,000 fans there, and you're trying to talk, your quarterback is listening to his OC in his helmet now. There's so much going on over the course of an actual game that's different from doing it in camp, and they're adjusting to that a little bit. But I've seen enough of the hot that I'm pretty optimistic about what they can be, and the cold stuff is mostly things that are correctable. It's not stuff that's based on their ability.
I totally agree. The things, as we talked about, them not picking things up, the timing is so important, because I can even just remember when I played my high school football, like trying to block a defensive lineman, time feels like it takes forever. And that was me. I was nowhere near Utah, like a level of to reach college football to where you're playing even bigger, these massive defensive tackles that it's that much harder to hold on to and contain. Like every second just feels like an eternity when you're locked up with someone who's a similar size and weight to you. So if there is a snap to the side or someone is a little late getting out of their stance, it really can mess up everything. And timing, Porter, is also so important to the quarterback position. So we both think that, hey, Cam or Isaac, I'll say Isaac still, as I said, just out of precaution for Utah. I do think there's a good chance if Isaac plays, whoever it is, I think Utah's going to win big. We see Brandon Rose, who I do think is QB3 right now, over Sam Huard. And I know a lot of people want to see these guys just because at times the offense has struggled with Isaac, but I look at it this way. I trust this coaching staff. Isaac won the job. Clearly he's ready. And I feel like that they should give Isaac all the reps he can, but I would still be happy to see Brandon Rose get in and get some live game experience. I think he got a little bit of it against the Southern Utah, if I remember correctly, but not too much. So either way, I trust what Utah is doing in making Isaac QB2 still, albeit with some struggles.
Yeah. And it's funny that Utah fans and Utah ecosphere are at a point where we want to see in week 3, we're like, do you think we can get QB3 reps? Do you think we could see that just to feel good, just to feel confident about going forward? And that just shows like the PTSD that I think fans have from last year and from how that all played out. And I get it. But yeah, I think that if you do get down into, and Isaac Wilson's the starter, it's going to be, as you mentioned, Sam Huard or Brandon Rose. I fully believe that going into the week, if they know Isaac's the starter and Cam's not going to play, they're going to figure out that QB2 and they're going to try to get him reps. Yeah. If the game's in hand. But again, I think the the goal for the game in Logan is to go up there and get a W and stay healthy. If they can do that without Cam, if they feel like they can do that without Cam, I wouldn't be all that surprised to see this be the scenario. I also will say if by the time we get to Thursday, Friday, Cam's fingers healed up and there's not like a big gash on there and he feels like he's got his movement and he's throwing a football well, he's going to play on Saturday. And I hope that's the case, because I do think that after nearly, a year and a half, almost 2 years off the field for Brant Kuithe, it was 2 years. You need some reps, man. You need to keep knocking the cobwebs off a little bit. Now, as Kyle has talked about, you want to see Cam be judicious a little bit and get out of the way if there's harm in on the way. But ultimately, you're not going to change who he is as a player, as a competitor. And I do think that some reps for him on Saturday would be beneficial. But if it's in hand at all, and no pun intended, if the game's in hand, get him out of there. Put it on ice and head back to Salt Lake.
I agree. Feel the same way. Would be happy to see him because there has been still some rust you can clearly see. But overall, if they want to rest him and just give Isaac more reps, I feel good about that. Porter, want a one-word answer from you. I will go yes to this question I'm about to ask. If it's Bryson Barnes versus Isaac Wilson, I would say Bryson Barnes is the better QB right now in this game. One-word answer. What would you say?
Yeah, right now, Bryson Barnes.
Yeah, I think we feel the same just because of the experience. It's such a big thing. And I'm sure Bryson's looking to bounce back because he did not get to beat USC like he did last year. So it'll be a fun game up in Logan. We can't wait to get it underway and cover it here. But Porter, in the meantime, where should people head over to if they want more Utah football coverage?
Yeah, obviously daily ESPN 700. We're up on the AM side, the FM side, stream it, podcast it, wherever it may be. And then right now, Utah Game Days, of course, 4 hours before kickoff. We get going with Utah Game Days. It's myself. It's Isaac Asiata. This weekend we'll be doing the show from I think 10:30 on, and about 10:30 a.m. you'll have game day coverage all day as we head to Logan.
So great to have game days back. So great to have Utah versus Utah State back. Make sure you guys check out everything they got going there. Porter, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, JT.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow previewing the Aggies versus the Utah Utes once again.